Well, it seems like everyone's been talking about him. We thought we would talk to him. Now to the storm center, a guy named Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, they don't appear to like your pledge. What's going on?
Well, two things. Some of the people who are being dragged up are retreads. There's nothing new in this last weekend about some of the senators who've said that they would be open to tax hikes. Remember, the Gang of Six, three of the people that you mentioned, spent 8 months sitting in a room with Democrats pretending to negotiate tax increases in return for entitlement reform. And after a while, even Coburn had to walk out of the room and admit that they were being offered nothing except tax increases. The president's budget is nothing except tax increases. The president's negotiating position is nothing except tax increases. And Harry Reid, who some of those senators might want to focus some of their attention on, has announced there won't be any entitlement reform. So to argue that the taxpayers should take the brunt of this battle and that they should not defend taxpayers but the spending interests in Washington strikes me as odd. The effort by some to get entitlement reform, the D's right now have said heck no, hell no, and Harry Reid has said it ain't happening. They ought to look at that rather than try and raise taxes to pay for Obama's bigger government. And
but
again,
do you fear that it's spreading, though? You and I have chatted about this before,
yeah.
and you were open when we chatted in Washington, talking about the fiscal cliff, to not equating reining in deductions or tax loopholes and the like, closing those off. I think your point was as long as it leads eventually to revamp of the tax code, making taxes simpler. But this goes beyond that, right? They have no quid pro quo, and they're offering this. Yeah. You argue what?
Well, there are two ways that you can damage the economy. One is to increase marginal tax rates. Everybody knows that would, NFIB, the small business groups, that would kill 700,000 jobs off the bat, probably worse than that. The other thing is to eliminate a trillion. They're not talking about a few deductions and credits. They're talking about $1 trillion worth of deductions and credits. That's what the other team wants. If you do that, you've just killed tax reform for a generation. Why? How do you ever get the rates down if you don't have the deductions and credits? What Obama's hoping to do is raise taxes, spend the money, kill tax reform for individuals dead.
Then what are you going to do to these guys like Eric Cantor and others who are the House Majority Leader have been talking increasingly about this as an option, despite what you're saying? Are you going to want to exact punishment on them in 2 years? What?
Two things. I think there have been the folks whose pictures you put up there, some of them have engaged in impure thoughts. They haven't actually voted for a tax increase. Let's be very clear. Cantor and Boehner have said they want revenues from economic growth. I want that. All Americans should want that. If we were growing at Reagan rates instead of Obama rates, we'd have 10 million people working and a lot more revenue in the coffer. Let's get more revenue through growth.
But does it trouble you that Warren Buffett disagrees with your notion that this would inhibit investment? In a column today, he said, only in Grover Norquist's imagination does such a response exist. What'd you make of that?
Okay. Warren Buffett has made a lot of money, some of it off of gaming the political system. He invests in insurance companies and then lobbies to raise the death tax, which drives people to buy insurance. Okay? You can get rich playing that game, but it's small c corrupt. It's not investing. It's playing crony politics and economics. That's a shame. He's done the same thing with some green investing. Shame on him for gaming the system and giving money to politicians who write rules that make your assets go up. The real economy, if he thinks that the government can take $1 and then you go to an investor who doesn't have that dollar and it doesn't affect investment, I'm sorry, that's just silly, unless he plans on going to Obama and getting money from a stimulus package and he considers that investment. When the government takes $1 away from the American people, or $1 trillion, that's $1 trillion not available to be saved and invested. And I'm sorry if Buffett can't see that, but that's kind of silly on his part.
But do you worry, though, Grover, that fairly or not, you've been seen as this unique, powerful, sort of like Wizard of Oz figure, who've been able to keep Republicans in lockstep with your way of thinking, and that with more bolting, especially prominent members bolting, it says something about what is in peril for you. Jenna McGregor in today's Washington Post put it this way: all it will take is a few powerful Republicans to actually break the pledge, and the wall will come tumbling down. The pledge's strength and Norquist's power lies in its universal acceptance among powerful Republicans. If that falls, so does Norquist.
We could ask President Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, how his second term went after he broke his pledge. Did he damage the pledge, or did by breaking his pledge he lost a second term for the presidency because he had not kept his word with the American people, because he raised taxes, because the Democrats promised to cut spending? They didn't cut spending. They did raise taxes. They increased spending. So George Herbert Walker Bush increased taxes on the American people to increase spending, threw the economy into a recession, and he couldn't get himself reelected.
So it sounds like you're saying people didn't forget that. Actually, you're quite right. They didn't forget that, and they took it out into the polls shortly thereafter. But are you saying here that you have a long memory? I know I don't want to liken you to Tony Soprano, but you're going to remember these guys who turn on you?
Okay. Nobody's turning on me. I understand why Harry Reid is trying to personalize it as Grover. What Harry Reid doesn't want to say is the American people don't want their taxes raised. They've elected a Republican Congress opposed to raising taxes, and I, Harry Reid, are at odds with the American people. Instead, he wants to argue he has a fight with me.
They are. They're looking like they are. So is that a repudiation of you, or recognition of the election, or what?
Okay, first of all, the promise on the pledge is to the American people. What I've accomplished with Americans for Tax Reform is to make it easy through the pledge for elected officials, candidates, and incumbents to credibly commit that they won't raise taxes. Corker was elected to the Senate because he took the pledge, and people had thought maybe he was too moderate, maybe he wouldn't make it, but he made that written commitment to the people of Tennessee. He would not be a senator today if he hadn't made that commitment. If he breaks it, he's going to have a conversation with the people of Tennessee about his keeping his word. And the same thing with other people who are elected because they made that written commitment to the people of their state.
That sounds like a threat.
No, look, I vote in Washington, D.C. The people that Corker promised, or Chambliss promised, or Graham promised are in their state. They haven't promised me anything. They promised the voters of their state that they would go to Washington and reform government, not raise taxes to pay for Obama's bigger government. They need to focus on reforming government, not on raising taxes to pay for bigger government each year. And it's a lot of work. It's not easy. But throwing up your hands and saying, I don't know, maybe I'll raise taxes instead of governing, is not the way to go.
Grover, thank you very much.